So far this year, the energy sector has risen about 40%. For more on the outlook for energy, we're joined right now by Rob Raymond, who's the founder and principal of RR Advisors. And Rob, we haven't seen this translate into sharply higher prices at the pump right now. So maybe a lot of Americans are thinking this is not a big deal. But you start seeing this rise with natural gas, and this could spell some pretty big trouble down the road, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's coming, right? And to some degree, I think the U.S. is lagging what the rest of the world is seeing, right? And really specifically, right, that's Europe and parts of Asia, and to some degree, China. And I think what you really see here, Becky, is a market that has flipped from being supply long over the last decade, net of growth of U.S. shale production, to now supply short in a world where shale production in the U.S. is no longer growing. And so there are a lot of consumers around the world that basically made the implicit bet, whether they understood it or not, right, that U.S. shale was going to continue to grow almost ad infinitum, right, where, right, for the foreseeable future, the next 5 and 10 plus years beyond 2020, right, that net of U.S. shale production growth, we live in a supply long market almost in perpetuity. And that has now changed, right? So everybody's having to reevaluate, hey, well, now, wait a minute, right, where am I going to get all these hydrocarbons from that I thought I was going to have access to when I commissioned a lot of these projects 2 and 3 and 5 years ago?
So the big oil companies have been very disciplined about not putting more money. In fact, they've pulled back. They're not doing the sort of production and development that they were doing for so long in the oil patch. And part of that came because investors said, this is dirty oil. We don't want this anymore. We're moving to new energy. What's the end result of this?
Well, the end result, unfortunately, is going to be very high prices. And so, this gets into a little bit of a, political conversation. And I would just comment, right, that we're very involved in companies associated with the electrification of many things. So that's Momentum Dynamics in Pennsylvania, Standard Power in Ohio. We look at this stuff all the day, right, all the time, every day. The point, though, becomes, right, that there has to be a gradual and a reasonable transition from a hydrocarbon-based economy to something that represents what everybody wants to call electrification. And in one sense, frankly, Europe is trying to do too much too fast, right? So they're basically decarbonizing, right, against the intermittent supply that they're building into their grids, primarily wind, that cannot ultimately provide for, right, the same level of consistency in terms of supply that the hydrocarbon-based economy could. And so they're caught in what we call the wind trap specifically, right, where they're now stuck between a rock and a hard place. They decommissioned very large natural gas storage facilities, very large natural gas producing fields all across that continent over the last 5 plus or minus years, all betting that wind could ultimately fill that void or that gap. And what they're learning the hard way is that it cannot, right? And so this needs to be gradual. It needs to be well thought out. And just candidly, right, the laws of physics apply to everybody equally. And nobody's going to get out of this if we continue to make stupid decisions.
The United States, you think they're headed on the same path? I should say?
Unfortunately, we are. We are. And you see that in places like, I live in Dallas, Texas, right? Specifically the state of Texas and what we went through back in February. The reality is 24% of our gen stack in this state is wind, right? We have more wind generation than any other state, right, in America relative to our consumption. And we paid an extreme price for that in February, right? So my point really is we're already seeing it. It is upon us.
It wasn't the problem in Texas that the wind turbines weren't really built for the cold weather. They had taken some shortcuts that were cheaper to put those wind turbines up because people thought it would never get that cold in Texas. Would the wind have worked if they had taken those other precautions to make sure that it was there for extreme weather?
Well, maybe, but let's go ask the people in the UK what's happened in the last week, right? All of their turbines are winterized out in the North Sea, right? And so, sorry, the wind just stopped blowing, right? The point is, it's intermittent. It's not as reliable, right, as base load generation. Intermittent is just a nice way of saying not reliable.